I do want to introduce Abby Piner, who came all the way from Raleigh/Durham, North Carolina. Abby works with the North Carolina State University's Center for Environmental Farming Systems and the Community Food Strategies program within that center. So I'm going to let Abby kind of introduce yourself a little bit more, maybe explain her work, and kind of dive in. And so again, just real quick, this is a discussion. So I want everybody, if you have questions, I know Abby's okay with that too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping to have some give and take, and I know you all have some interesting stuff going on here, so I'm excited to hear about that, learn from you all, share what we're doing in North Carolina. I'm happy to be here. I always try to have very few slides, and it usually doesn't work out. So hopefully the visuals are helpful. I want to give you a quick kind of overview of what my plan is, and we'll go from there. So you have a kind of a sense of where we're headed. I want to do a quick review of what happened last week and just kind of set the context for the food system through that. And then talk a little bit about community food strategies and our work in North Carolina. And then I want to talk a little bit about policy and a little bit about networks separately. And then we'll have dinner. And then after dinner, we'll dive more into food policy councils, what that work is looking like in North Carolina, and talk about some examples of what food councils that we're working with are doing, and hopefully hear from you all similarities, differences, have a discussion about what strikes your interest, what you think really resonates here, what are the differences in Louisiana. So that's my plan. We'll do some working together. I'll have you standing up and moving around some, so don't get too cozy in your seats. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about community food strategies in a minute, but I want to start with the food system and local food. And my understanding is that last week was kind of a review of the food system. So how many of you were actually here last week? Half of you. Okay. Also, can I get your names again really quickly? I met some of you.
Chris. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah. Chris Adams from Lafayette.
Great.
John, Dan from Cleveland.
Right here, he never leaves this place.
Yeah, that's right.
Robert Hayesmark, I'm from DeVille.
Mm-hmm.
Tia Powers, and I'm from Alexandria.
Derek Robinson, Alexandria.
Derek, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bahia, I'm from Central Texas.
And then Eddie Thompson from Alexandria.
Great. Thanks. Okay, so what I would like for you to do is take one of these. If you would take one and pass it around. Take one and pass it around. I would like for you to write one thing that you remember from last week that struck you, that inspired you. And if you weren't here, something that you know about the food system, local food system. What comes to mind when you think about food system, local food system in particular? So one thing, if you were here last week, something from last week. And the other thing I'd like you to write down is something that you're interested to hear about this week when we think about food policy
Should they be on the same card?
and food policy councils. They can be on the same card. So hopefully you're getting close, or at least done with one. I'll give you another 30 seconds. No quiz, no pressure. And then I'm going to ask you to talk with your neighbor about what you wrote. So share your names. Maybe the three of you can work together, and then the two of you and the two of you. And just share what came up for you quickly. Just take a minute and a half or so.
One of the things that came up last night was food security, which I had never really considered. So it's interesting.
This is a great place to be tip on phone or just right now, I'm really thinking about upstream community issues and how they can
I'm
be impacted by food policy councils and things like
in this area.
Kind of fun.
I live in a farm.
Are you-
annually.
Yeah.
But they're all
You know,
jobs, and we don't.
yeah, that's a good question. Have you looked at Blue Cross Blue Shield of the Foundation?
No, actually, I haven't. I mean, I know this.
Starting to get this, like, how can local
So they just started a new funding
organizations
cycle
I can't remember what it's called.
that could be good for
The
children.
judges or whatever.
They're always
So,
saying,
you know,
you know,
we would encourage you to recommend that supports better.
They funded, they initially funded our local foods initiative,
Access.
but, you know, they gave $2,000 grants.
Yes, which is more.
So
Those are the sort
if only one of you is shared, make sure the other ones share, especially about the food system. What came up for you?
embrace those issues that are broader economic development and how it does impact farming.
Because thinking about, we just finished all.
I don't want to give you the answer, but it's my big
What would I do
question right
right
now.
Take about 20 more seconds, and then we're gonna share back.
They're showing kids what a vegetable is. And they don't know.
But they don't.
Yeah,
You've probably been.
I know.
So maybe the person saying that they had.
She's talked about having buyer, grower, make us successful in North Carolina.
Okay, so it sounds like some stuff came up for you all. You had some stuff to talk about. So if you would just share back some of the things you talked about, specifically about what came up for you last week or about the food system in general. I'm going to capture it up here.
I just told them, I'm originally from Florida, but I live by the air base. And I said, this lady, she sells a lot of sweet corn, and, you know, I see the signs, and a lot of people, when I went to buy some, I seen a lot of traffic, you know, for us buying the sweet corn.
Yeah. So is that just this last week or in general?
No, I think it was like this summer.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah, but they grow a lot of cotton,
Yep.
and soybean, and corn around in my neighborhood.
Okay, but also in your neighborhood, there's somebody growing sweet corn and selling it, and lots of people are buying it.
Lots of people.
So there's some demand for local food here.
Yes.
Okay? What else did y'all talk about?
Well, I mentioned food security because that's something I really had never given a whole lot of thought, and they talked about it last week, and that came across my mind more than once over the week, so.
Great. What else?
Mine from last week was the need for educating the community about the source of food, nutrition, and what local food means to the economy, for the local economy.
Great. What else came up? What about you guys?
So for me, I've been thinking a lot about communication being a key part of the function of the system.
Say a little bit more about that.
So part of it could be supply and demand. So I give the example of talking to buyers who said, I'm just waiting for product to come in that I can buy. And then growers saying, there's not enough people out there to buy my product, so I'm not gonna grow it. That's one example of the communication that could be happening that isn't. And then it also about like pricing. You know, maybe the farmer's already got somebody to sell to, but figuring out the price that's best for the farmer, that still works for the buyer. That also takes some kind of information transfer. And how does that happen, or who's doing that? So.
Great. So some of the nuts and bolts of like, how do we get from production to consumption in a way that's working for everybody along here. Okay. Anything else?
I've thought a lot about the role of cooperatives and working together and forming associations here and cooperatives in this.
Interesting. Okay, great. How about you guys?
I can kind of, piggyback off of what he's saying with cooperatives. I work for USDA, so there's a big push for any type of cooperative, for funding for cooperatives and what have you.
Yep.
So if you can get a conglomeration of guys together and provide the supply, I mean, I feel like it's here. I feel like Sinlaw or Alexander or whatever, the whole area, there is a desire for it, there is a demand for it. I know that's kind of in the same vein as what he's saying, but
Yeah, that's great.
we kind of went on the second topic a little bit more than
Okay.
the first.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't here last week, but lately I've been thinking a lot about upstream community sustainability issues and how local food policy councils or state or regional food policy councils can recommend and inform policy that impacts things like making recommendations that economic development supports fair living wages and access to affordable health care and transportation, and that those upstream issues that don't relate to the actual infrastructure of the food system but support the humanity within the food structure. So that's sort of where my mind has been on policy lately.
Great.
How to get the wages up.
Exactly. Great. Well, that's an excellent segue. Thank you. So that's a lot of things, and I'm sure some image like this looks familiar to most of you from last week, or in general, just about how food gets from the farm, processed, distributed, into some sort of retail outlet, whether it's a grocery store or a farm stand with sweet corn, or a restaurant, how folks buy that, how healthy it is, what kind of nutrition they get from it, and then how the waste is managed. So that's sort of the whole food system. So this idea of local food, I just want to say a few things about what kind of ground our work at the Center for Environmental Farming Systems and in community food strategies about the food system, and that will kind of flow into the rest of what we talk about tonight. And so I'm not exactly sure what your conversation was last week, but some of the things that we believe are that, one, this is extremely complex. And every one of these circles has its own multiple entryways and impacts. And so there are many ways to view the system, enter the system, affect the system. Everything from access to health to jobs, that's all embedded in here. So it's extremely complex. We often use this picture to talk about that the food system can feel like this when you're trying to affect it. And that's not a bad thing, right? Having many different perspectives can be really positive, but we need to have a perspective that's wide enough that we can see the whole while we're also trying to work on any one part. And so that's what food policy councils can help us do. The other thing that we would say is that the current food system, which is different than the local food system in a lot of ways, works as it was designed to work. So you hear a lot about the broken food system and how we want to fix the current food system. And we would say it's actually not broken. It was designed from the Industrial Revolution and after World War II to be industrialized, to make a lot of food very efficiently. And it does an awesome job. It's working. I think what we're discovering is that maybe the current design doesn't give us the output that is working or is working wholly. And I would say that because we have a lot of food on hand, 40% of which is wasted. We have an obesity rate that is shocking. In North Carolina, if the trends continue, 1 in 3 children will have diabetes by the time they're adults. Folks who work in the food system, whether they're farmers, farm workers, restaurateurs, working in the back of kitchens, aren't often making a living wage. So all that is to say, we have a system that's working as it was designed to work, and we're not getting the outputs that maybe we would hope to get for a healthy community. So our perspective is that we need to redesign a food system, thinking about the things we want to get out at the end. And that food policy councils for us are a way to do that. So that's kind of our perspective. It can feel overwhelming. This quote to me is also a little bit overwhelming, but in an inspiring way. So I hope it feels that way to you too. A lot of times I show and people are like, well, that's kind of a downer. But it also means that I think it's really good work because it's big work, and it can affect our communities in powerful ways. So those are some of our assumptions in the work that we do. I lead this team that's called Community Food Strategies. And my home organization is the Center for Environmental Farming Systems, as you all heard. But Community Food Strategies is very intentionally a multi-organizational project team. And so we have 3 organizations that do food-specific work and really sustainable agriculture work in different places across North Carolina. And then we have a project team member who works at a place called Carolina Common Enterprise, which does cooperative development around the state. With lots of different organizations, many of which are grounded in agriculture. A lot of that is with food, some of it is with textiles, but that's part of our team. And then we also work with a person from CareShare Health Alliance. So they develop health coalitions. And so this is starting to get at, one, the idea that food councils are very cross-sector, and so it also feels important for us in our work to be cross-sector and working across different paradigms and organizations. And 2, it just calls to the point about the complexity and the many different perspectives of the food system. And this is what we do. We support communities who are interested in developing local food councils, usually at the county level. We help them get started, and then if they're existing, we help them build capacity. So that's us. Happy to talk more about that. For us, it's about the community voice. Food councils become this place where we can understand the kind of priorities and perspectives at a community level and start to make change based in the context of a place, so that the realities of Alexandria or the 10 parishes that are served here might be different than those in New Orleans or somewhere else in Louisiana. So it's about the community voice for us. And the 2 ways that we work are policy and networks. And so that's why I want to spend sort of before dinner talking about those 2 things. So we're going to start with policy, but what questions do you have right now?
One question,
Yeah.
something that you said about diabetes.
Yeah.
1 in 3 children. How would you set a program up to make that community aware? Say for instance, you got this one county, and you know you got 3 conglomerate counties, and they got a high rate of child diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
And the policy is that we want to reduce, you know, diabetes in those 3 counties
Mm-hmm.
through healthy nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
So you would coordinate something with the local leaders, have focus groups, and try to get that information out to the communities, and, you know, set a goal by 2020, we hope
Mhm.
that, you know, these set of kids, you know, we can reduce diabetes.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we'll have some time to dig into maybe some
Okay.
potential answers later. I think there are a lot of things involved that we'll talk about, and food councils offer a place to set that as a priority and then use the resources from all these different perspectives to try to move that forward.
Okay.
So it would take a lot of different avenues, which is part of what food councils offer. So let's come back to it. Remind me later. We'll talk about some policies that food councils are implementing, and then we could use this as an example to try to get at that potentially. But it's a good question. So when I say policy, what do you think? What comes to mind?
Boring.
Government.
Uh-huh.
I think a little p and big P policy.
All
Little P
right.
policy is my policy. I have a food systems policy in my house, right? What I buy is my personal policy. It's
Totally.
Little P policy. Big P policy is when I'm at city council or working with the hospital board or places where you break out the big P policy
Yeah.
and impact other people's households,
Mhm.
hopefully, other than mine.
But here you're like totally in line. Does that resonate for other people?
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great because it means we can go quickly through this portion. So this is what Merriam-Webster says about policy. What words jump out?
Course of action.
What was this one?
I said method and action.
Method, course of action, guide,
Conditions, given conditions.
given conditions. Yep.
It's not a passive voice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, totally. Oftentimes, I think when we say policy, these words come to mind for people. And who said boring? I feel like this is like the boring piece. People it's kind of like overwhelming. It's like if you dropped a huge book on the table and we're sort of like policy. Oftentimes, that's what we get. And even when we're working to develop food policy councils, a lot of the groups we work with are tentative to go into policy, partly because of this, I think, partly because policy and advocacy get kind of enmeshed in one another, and that gets kind of scary. So there's some things around like how do we get into policy and what does that mean? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So federal, state, and local policy gets into all those words, you know, statutes at the federal level, regulations at the state level, ordinances at the city and county level. And then it can feel overwhelming. This is an example of just in North Carolina, what do counties have control over? What do both cities and counties have control over? What do only cities have control over? So when we're talking about making legislated policy change, which is part of what food policy councils can do, it can feel overwhelming. I totally get it. You know, we talk about this with food councils a lot. Like, what does it mean to change a legislated policy? How long does that take? What do you have to know about budgets? Who's in charge? That kind of thing. And we come across this just as an example when we think about farm to school a lot. Farm to school, any of you all doing any work or interested or have folks who are talking about farm to school? Does that mean like nothing to some of you?
But we talked about it
Yeah.
there are people that, I don't know her name, but she wants, no, the lady that was sitting here that.
Kelly.
Yes.
Kelly, yeah.
Yeah, she wants to get local foods into schools
Mm-hmm.
but there is policy against, and like if you can isolate that policy and work on just that, I think that would solve a lot of problems, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But figuring out what it is that you have to work on is.
Right.
What she was saying, you can't have local food in the school.
Because there are certain
Oh.
federal regulations that they have to follow.
It's complicated.
It's very complicated. Farm to school, farm to school is a big topic in North Carolina. Lots of folks and lots of food policy councils we work with want to get local food into local schools. They say, you know, we have 17 farmers in our county and we want our students in our schools to know our farmers and have their food in our schools, which is, you know, a great idea.
Start them off young.
There you go, start them off young. And the regulations around getting Robert's food into the local school include all of these regulations. It's everything from the federal Farm Bill to the Department of Public Instruction, to your school district, to child nutrition directors and how much funding they have and what they can buy. It's extremely complicated. And so what we encourage folks to think about is exactly what Bahia is saying. Bahia, right? That this local, state, and or federal change in policy creates a huge systems change. It's an important goal. But the starting place might be your own house. You personally. So if we want local food in schools, what we try to encourage folks to do is think about the institutional policies, little p policies, that you could change, that could help you learn what works, and also get you closer to more people on board with moving this forward. So with any policy, whether it's farm to school or whether it's healthy foods in your workplace or the living wage in your county, what we like to ask is for folks to consider all of these levels. So what could you personally do? How quickly could you make that change and what would that impact look like? What would your own policy be? What about your family or your neighborhood? What about the wider community? So in farm to school, that might be the PTA, then the whole school. So that's sort of little p policy. Does that make sense? That there's many ways to affect change, and starting with legislated policy maybe isn't where you or your group are yet. That doesn't mean you can't do anything. You can do quite a lot. So we'd say focus there first. Figure out where's the highest level that you could make impact now, and do that. So this is food policy, basically. So I want to practice this a little bit with this idea of big P, little p. And so let's do one together, and then we'll do a few in pairs. So do you guys think that this would be a little p policy change or a big P policy change, and why? So big P would be we have to change a legislation, either an ordinance or a regulation or a statute. Little p would be maybe it's already in place and we just need to educate somebody, or make a smaller sort of institutional change. Can y'all all read this? So a second career part-time farmer in an urban area finds out that some of her acquaintances at the farmer's market get a property tax break because their property is a farm. She calls you as an extension agent in this context, to find out how to apply for the same tax break. Her farm doesn't make much money, and it would really help make ends meet if she didn't have to pay the high urban residential property tax rate on her farm.
So what are we looking for?
What is the answer here? Is this a little p answer? Is there some small institutional shift that could happen? Or just an education piece? You know, does somebody have the wrong information and we could educate folks and this would be solved? Or do we need to see what the current regulations are and try to change those?
Okay. So I mean, starting with the farmer, is she really part-time? Or is she just calling herself part-time? I mean, that's what, if I were the agent she comes to, that's the first thing I'm gonna ask is how much of your time are you dedicating to this?
Okay,
Do you realize where you are?
okay. So find out some more information from her. Derek?
Okay, excuse me. I know there's no dumb question. What constitutes a farmer?
Similar question. I think it's a similar question. Great question.
Really good question.
We're going to trust her that she's an urban farmer, and she might not be growing a whole lot of food, but she's growing some food, and she's selling it to somebody.
I'd say that.
That's it, so she's a farmer. If you grow and sell, you're considered a farmer.
Right.
There's a county in Iowa that says in the county regulation, you are defined as being a farmer if your neighbor will say so. I kid you not, county ordinance, that's the definition of a farmer.
So, I mean,
They legislated it.
They did.
and the thing is, that's where you have to start, is finding out what the problem is. The problem may be that she's saying she's a part-time farmer, but she's making a certain amount of money, she's not claiming it, you know?
Uh-huh. So I want to ask, so good points. I want to ask specifically about the tax break.
Yeah, so it might just be that the other people that get the tax break asked for it,
Yeah,
and she hasn't asked for it.
she doesn't know. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So the answer is we're not sure. It's possible that she needs to be educated about how she goes about getting that tax break. It's also possible that her farmer friends don't live in the city. Maybe they live outside the city limits or out in a rural area where zoning for farmland is available, and the land that her farmer friends live on can be zoned as a farm, which decreases their taxes, and that's currently not available in the city. If that's true, she could work maybe with a food policy council to try to shift that legislation. So
She should
You have to
also be
decide.
aware, before she goes to county council or wherever, to ask the question, to make sure she's not in violation of existing legislation in her current operation.
So maybe she's doing
Also
something
great.
else that's not legislated.
Yeah, because
Sure.
sometimes growing food in the city isn't allowed.
Right.
And depending on where you're zoned, and so that's also a way that the food policy councils can have information available to get the questions in a way that's safe for the producer that protects them.
Right, so that they don't dig themselves deeper.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to sell the food to be considered a farmer in most states. Or can you just grow your own food and not sell it and be considered a
Yep.
farmer? So which one is?
No, it
Both.
varies by
Both.
parish and county
Okay.
across the United
Yeah.
States. That's a local ordinance, and then there's state and federal definitions that are also different as well. And then the federal agencies, depending on which agency you're talking to, each federal agency has a different definition of what it means to be a farmer. So that really is a very complicated, big P question.
And that's why your question is so ingenious.
Yes.
Is simplicity.
Brilliant question.
Great
One of my
question.
favorites.
Okay, so these are maybe a little bit easier, but I want you to work in your teams again to just identify whether you would call this, each of these 5 things, a big P policy shift. Does it need to be legislated at either the local, state, or federal level? Or is it a little p policy change? An institutional, organizational, individual shift. Does that make sense? So work in teams. You can decide what you think. You can, yeah, well, do that for now.